Friedrich Nietzsche was a German existential philosopher, famous for saying that God is dead. He is also an eternal source of quotation and inspiration from edgy pseudo-intellects on the internet. He says in a video about Nietzsche. Now, the thing is, I've been going through a lot of this stuff because I've decided to broaden my horizons, go back to the well. There's got to be some input coming in. It can't just all be output. So I've been reading some philosophy and psychology. I've been trying to build bridges of meaning because one, it's interesting. Two, I think it is essentially related, even if it doesn't seem that way, to the field of lifting and performance and achievement. And it speaks to a lot of the things that are really important about what we do that might go over everybody's head. And maybe it's also because I'm about to be a father. I'm 4 months away from actually having a child that I'm responsible for. And that is putting me through some weird type of crisis roller coaster. And a lot of it is searching for meaning, not just taking for granted the things I think I know, but really trying to pay attention to the things that I haven't even tried to figure out. This has been enlightening and anxiety-inducing and terrifying all at the same time. So I'm going to try to relate some of this content back to that wherever I can, wherever I think it's appropriate. And even if it feels strained, I think the important takeaway is when you do read something that makes your hair stand on end or that like fits like a puzzle piece into some piece of your life, I think it's important to know that not every investigation has to be like the most important question of your being or your existence. I think it can very much be on a small scale, figuring out how to solve problems, how to relate to people in your life, and how to organize things that seem as frivolous as lifting weights. But we're going to get into it. I'm going to tell you what Nietzsche taught me about lifting. I'm going to talk specifically about Thus Spake Zarathustra, which was Nietzsche's work that was kind of an answer to the New Testament. Without trying to be overly off-putting to the religious members of the audience, Nietzsche thought that he was going to overtake the role of Jesus Christ. He called himself the Antichrist. He was extremely critical of Christianity and religion, and he called it a slave or herd morality that drove it. Essentially, the idea being that great men could go on and conquer nations and build new things and demonstrate art and creativity and greatness, but it was the bitter, resentful masses that pulled them down because they were not great. So they just gave into resentment and developed a code that positioned them at the center of the universe to give them leverage. It evolved out of necessity in his mind, not necessarily because it was objectively moral. Now you can see that that's kind of a heartless take, and he gets criticized accordingly for that. But if you suspend that just a little bit, if you don't get so offended as Nietzsche goes about slaughtering sacred cows in front of their owners, you can see how it actually might appeal to people that feel lost, feel like they are part of a herd, feel like they have untapped potential, or they don't have anything to reach for. You can see how it kind of becomes a source of inspiration for people wanting to get more out of their life, because it ultimately does speak to the individual saying, hey, there's this path ahead of you, and let me tell you about your role in the world so you might get a handle on it and go do great things. Now, it wasn't just the type of bitter atheism that you might associate with like a 19-year-old who's drunk at a college party trying to tell the girl he's talking to who has a rosary around her neck how fucking stupid it is. There was actually some deep philosophical insight. The idea was that when you get to the point where God is dead, when science has eliminated the need for God or explained him away, that there are actually a lot of repercussions. And if there isn't something to replace that, that society crumbles.
When we lose our cosmic orientation, when we are no longer able to distinguish between good and evil in some authoritative way, then we are left with a plurality of perspectives, none of which can be necessarily linked up together, and none of which is necessarily wrong. Hegel once said that at night all cows are black. Well, I would be tempted to say that Nietzsche has turned out the lights and now all the cows and everything else, it's all black.
So the idea was that God propped up these philosophical assumptions that led to eventually the creation of science and empiricism, which in turn displaced the need for God. And the analogy that was used was it was a machine that was very elaborately designed to unplug itself. Now, Nietzsche proposed that if you take God away, you are left with nothing. You're left with an absolute mess, and that's unacceptable. So a lot of people misinterpret Nietzsche as being nihilistic, and actually he wasn't. His writings were actually about pursuing art and creativity, and again, man's greatness. You wouldn't outline a path to the Ubermensch if you were in fact nihilistic.
We have as much importance as birds or fishes or pond scum. Whatever value we have will be value that we create as individuals, not that is revealed to us from on high. And the best we can do then is some sort of heroism in which we create a domain of value rather than inheriting one.
So being the egomaniac he was, he thought, well, if God is gone, I'll step in, I'll replace the role. And there he put out what kind of read like a religious text, Thus Spake Zarathustra. And in that, he has a metaphor for man's progress, the 3 stages of metamorphoses in relation to what Nietzsche called the Great Dragon. Now, the Great Dragon was this huge imposing figure hovering right above your head, taking up the entirety of the air above you. And on the dragon's back, each scale represented a thou shalt. A thou shalt is a rule. It's some tenet you have to live by. It's a societal expectation. And the dragon, with an entire back filled with glittery scales, represented all of society and all of the oppressiveness that you might come across. Now, this is universal in everybody's life because no matter who you are, there is a great dragon. It is a combination of the rules your parents had for you, the religious institutions that enforce the rules of your community. It could be a given political sect that you identify with. It could be the 12 steps at an AA meeting. There is some set of rules or tenets where society has an expectation. And these are things that form kind of a cage. They restrict you. Now, that's not inherently bad. The restriction actually benefits you in a lot of ways. It takes away guesswork. It gives you a path. It gives you a network of people, support to bump up against. There is limitation. So there's, let's say, fewer wrong answers. Now, the first stage of Nietzsche's Metamorphoses was the camel. Now, you may not think of a camel as an inspiring figure, but I actually got a little excited when I read through the description of who the camel is and what he does. The camel is a beast of burden. It's subservient to the dragon, to the thou shalt. The cage that occupies it, the burden that is given to it, it doesn't just carry the burden. It's not just designed to do that, but its being takes pleasure in the burden. It asks, what is heavy? So I might kneel down and be well laden. The camel specifically says, give me the heavy burden so that I may rejoice in my strength. So that is a stage. It's a particular stage of human development that Nietzsche posits that is required, where you actually take on the task. You follow the rules. You don't just follow them. You do so exuberantly. You contribute to the societal framework that so many people see as being a prison. Now, it's not until you've actually paid your dues, that you've done that you move on to the next stage, which is represented by the lion. Now, this is where everybody gets excited because what do lions do? They fuck shit up. The lion is everybody's favorite representation of this like God-killing alpha rebel machine that fucks bitches and chews gum, but is currently all out of gum.
Are you looking for access to exclusive programs from the best minds in the field and some of your favorite YouTube influencers? Then look no further than Boostcamp. Boostcamp is a long-term sponsor of this channel, and I wouldn't be partnered with them if they didn't provide a premier product. If you want optimal performance, you can't just wing your weight selection. You have to make deliberate steps forward, so you need a program, and you need a way to track progress on it. Boostcamp makes it easy to track your workouts from the convenience of your phone, so you never have to rely on your sloppy handwriting or your bad memory. And they give you access to a library of exclusive programs from some of the most well-known names in the business: Eric Helms, Bryce Lewis, Jeffrey Verity Schofield, Bald Omni-Man, and yours truly. We all have programs up there that can only be found on the app, and it is absolutely free. My programs, Bull Mastiff and 70s Powerlifter, are both up there, and you can also check out Full Sturker, which I wrote to tell you how to get strongman jacked using just the things you find in a regular corporate gym. So a special thank you to Boostcamp for making this channel possible. Unburden yourself from the hard business of making the perfect program from scratch. We've got them pre-made for you. Download their app right now by clicking on the link in the description.
The lion is when you start to push back. The lion is the fierce creature that has the strength, the ferocity, the will to respond when the dragon says, thou shalt. The lion says, no, I will. Now, the lion is not a developmental stage oriented with the creation of something new. It doesn't care about that. That's where you lead into the third stage, which is the child who plays like an artist or a poet. And in the play, in the creativity, the child can say yes, where the lion can only say no. Now, that immediately started giving me parallels into real life about where people are along the stage. Not only did I start to look into myself and ask, when have I ever been the camel? I've been inspired. I followed rules. I followed training systems, but I've never committed entirely to something. I've never taken joy. I've never rejoiced in my strength, in my ability to follow through and commit to a certain program. And thusly, I haven't grown to a potential I probably could have. I mean, if you think of the most restrictive religious sects, think of being an Orthodox Jew or living in a tightly knit Muslim community. Think of what that community's like, what it provides for you, what you can do within it. Instead, Many of us like to sit on the outside and kind of piecemeal things out. We like to pull a little bit as it suits us, as it makes sense, or as our mood calls for. And you're not going to get the same result doing that as if you actually committed, as if you dug in and made yourself part of that system. In training, that's especially true. Again, this doesn't have to be the most like deep, profound, truest thing about you. We can find these parallels in different things in our life. And that's exactly what stood out. In training, I was like, I've done just about everything, but for how long? How much have I contributed to a system? How much have I fleshed out everything I could, figured out every pivot, every maneuver, how to make myself grow in the context of one particular approach? And that's often what I tell other people to do, that the more you stick to a system, the more masterful you get at it. It isn't until you've mastered something that you've earned the right to transition to the lion, to push back, to figure out why it isn't working, to find the parts that don't make sense, find the spots that aren't worth the cost, find the spots that don't do what they're supposed to, and push back. But it's based on the service as the camel that gives you that right. Then I think of how many people today immediately start out like out of the womb. They think they're a fucking lion. It's like, oh, I've been here for 5 minutes. Let me look around and start throwing rocks at institutions, start tearing things down, start telling everybody about how this is dumb, this is oppressive, no, 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 no. And it's not just on like a social activist scale. People do this in their lives. People do this in their families. You routinely have people who are defined by their inexperience and lack of commitment to something that are going to tell you why your commitment to anything is stupid and why it should change. In addition to that, the lion in and of itself, again, the lion is not the child. It is a step to the child. It is the step to new creation that if it does what it is supposed to do, if it is deemed worthy enough, that creation ends up as a scale on the dragon's back. The point of this isn't to kill the dragon because you can't. It's a fundamental presence of reality. We will always exist in relation to one another, and there will always be this meta structure of expectation, of rules and regulations, and it should be that way. Taking the dragon away would be like taking away the pressure of gravity. It's a thing that restrains us, but that we also need to exist. So for those that just want to be the lion, they've been here for one day, they want to start tearing down fences that are in their way, those are people that typically don't have a plan or concern themselves with what the stage of creation is. And it's easy to do that. It's easy to align yourself with a group, to take things down that you view as being in your way and useless when nobody is holding you accountable for what happens next. So when you think about these stages, think about your lifting career. Think about how much time you spent as a child. I mean, development usually starts with play, and we end up finding ourselves in a structure later on that we serve. And we almost seem to repeat that cycle as adults into our fully actualized self, getting closer to becoming the overman who's aware and who makes rules and who manifests his own greatness in relation to all of the huge, like insurmountable pressures and obstacles around him. But with training specifically, most will go into the gym and play. And hobbies are typically done frivolously just for the fun of it. There's nothing wrong with that. But we train, so many of us, with a bucket list in mind, with things we want to achieve, with a sense of greatness of what we could potentially do that might set ourselves apart, that might be something that people talk about when we're gone. That specifically implies that there is a discipline. There is something to be followed. There is a set of rules. What is lifting culture if it isn't the procedural following of rules, the replication of principles that we know give a predictable result so that we can see those results manifest in ourselves? So if all you do is play, you're not going to get anywhere close. You would be infinitely better off blindly committing to one system, following high intensity, following conjugate, following CrossFit, for God's sakes. If it confines you and forces you into a system where the decisions are made on your behalf, that is infinitely better than bouncing off the walls with no particular direction. But it isn't until you followed a system. And there's so many others besides the ones I just listed, but it isn't until you followed it that you have a reason to change. And so much of what you're going to see, and maybe you've experienced this, is tweaking systems that you don't have experience with because you want to see how this fits with this. Fine at like a third grade level of experimenting when you're starting to get a handle on this type of stuff and see what fits and why. But that's just a stage. The real change, the change that should sustain long after you're gone, is after you've put in the service, after you've built yourself up on the back of the centuries of wisdom that has come before you, instead of thinking at the start that you can reinvent the wheel. So what I'm going to say to you out there who are struggling, maybe you enjoy training, but maybe you're not happy with your results, instead of thinking, what can I change? Instead of thinking of what new thing can I do? What can I create out of thin air? The question I have is, how did you start your training? What's the first thing you did? Did you serve as the camel? Did you kneel down and ask to be well laden with rules and restrictions to guide you in a particular way? Or did you start from a place of creativity and development? Did you start pushing against things that you hadn't participated in enough to actually be critical of? Ask yourself if you served as a camel. And if you have, ask if it's time to go back. So that's all I got for today. Thanks so much for watching, guys. I'm super interested to see what I get into. I'm going to be giving stuff to you as I learn it myself. So on the one hand, if this interests you, let me know so I can make more content like this. On the other hand, if any of you have more experience in this stuff, please feel free to add into the discussion in the comments. As I draw connections from something I read to some life event and so on, there is almost a guaranteed certainty that I'm going to misrepresent a quote or maybe frame something the way it was supposed to be intended to. And I know there's a lot of brilliant scholars out there. I am not the authority here. I'm just relaying the most recent thing I learned because I figured it helps me and maybe it's interesting for you. So everybody who has something to contribute, please leave it in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Till next time, this is Bromley. I'll see you.